Hey, Ohio gozaimasu. Welcome to our first World History online lesson for the fourth quarter of this year. It's Mr. Levy. I am very happy that you're all checking out this video. I am going to try to make this as painless as possible. I know sitting wherever you are, listening to my voice and watching some slides might not be the thing you want to do most, but I will try to make it go quickly and hopefully cover some interesting stuff. So what I want to do in this very short presentation is just review some of the things we covered last quarter, mostly so we can get up to speed before we tackle our next unit starting next week. So I'm just going to go over stuff very quickly that we learned, and at the end of this video is going to be your next assignment, assignment number 2 for this week, that you can complete, and I'll talk about at the end of the video. So as you see in front of you, we've got our model of analysis that we've been using all year, self, culture, and society. You might want to keep that in mind as we talk about those things, about these topics we covered, just because it might help you when you're writing your paragraph. So let's jump into it. Europe from 1550 to 1815. So just to remind you, last quarter, one of the things we covered earlier on was the scientific revolution. We talked about guys like Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton, and a lot of their ideas about how, the Earth may in fact revolve around the sun, that there may be mathematical models that would allow you to predict planets' movements, that there might be things like gravity that could be evaluated using things like calculus, et cetera, and so forth. The good old scientific method. And we talked about how these ideas, many of them that were inspired by information gathered in the Renaissance or rediscovered in the Renaissance, really helped a lot of thinking kind of move towards a model based on empiricism, rather than, maybe, for lack of a better word, mysticism. And we talked about how this thinking moved the ideas of individuals and the culture as a whole away from thinking about things like astrology being valid towards really looking at the planets and the stars in a new and different way. Um, Obviously, this process took hundreds of years, and one of the things that I want to emphasize as we talk about in the next few slides, all these things weren't happening one after the other. A lot of them were happening kind of at the same time. But over that period, a lot of people wasn't crazy about this, including the church, among others. But it really was a process that kind of moved a lot of thinkers towards this idea of science and empiricism, things that you can prove as a way forward for humanity. We also talked a bit about the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment thinkers. We talked about that hypothetical, not realistic situation where if some young person found a wallet in a Burger King and it had $100 in it and some credit cards, what would they do with that wallet? And would that make them good, bad, or otherwise? We talked about a number of Enlightenment thinkers, such as Locke, Hobbes, Hume, and Rousseau, among others, and their ideas about whether human beings were naturally good, naturally bad, or otherwise, and what role individuals had in relationship to their community and their government as citizens, among other things. And this tied into our other model of thinking that we've been talking about all years, the human being and the citizen. What different people in different times and places think they have to do to be safe, healthy, and happy. So we talked about how those Enlightenment ideals really gave people an idea of what individuals' rights might be, and how these rights are really reflected in things like our own Bill of Rights that we enjoy in this country, our right to free speech, our right to freely worship any religion we choose, etc. And we talked about why do we think we deserve these rights, and do we, and what do we have to do in return for those rights. So those were, and that's a quick review of some of the Enlightenment ideas that we discussed last quarter. And we talked about how those Enlightenment ideals led to some major change and a couple of key revolutions during this time. The first one we looked at was our own American Revolution with our own Enlightenment thinker, Benjamin Franklin, one of the few who really led some of these ideas or took some of these ideas and helped put them into documents like our own Declaration of Independence and Constitution, and how that revolution here in what will become the United States was an inspiration to another group of people in France who led another revolution, the Third Estate, getting kind of fed up with how conditions were under the rule of the First and Second Estates, and eventually saying, we've kind of had enough of this, and we want you guys to actually give us a say in our government and allow us to have a part in how we run our society. Now, of course, that revolution didn't necessarily end well for everyone, and it went through a number of stages, ending up in a rather bloody stage where a number of people lost their heads, literally. And that led to the rise of a gentleman named Napoleon, who you were reading about at the beginning of this week, who kind of seized on that opportunity during the revolution to rise up and become an emperor and lead France out of the revolution and kind of into a period of expansion where he went and began fighting wars across Europe and even into Africa and Egypt to expand the might of France into what he saw as an empire. And it was all going fairly well until he marched into Russia and kind of got rather chilly during the winter and everyone froze and he had to come home. And they put him on a small island in 1815. So those were some of the topics. We talked most about the French Revolution, but we've touched on the other two as well. So just things we talked about briefly, and the really tied into those ideas that came before about from the Enlightenment, and that kind of ideas about the scientific revolution as well. And the last thing I want to remind us about is how we started talking about the Industrial Revolution as well. How this idea of moving away from agriculture to the manufacturing of goods, meaning the mass production using machines to make things to buy and sell, a process that started in England and quickly expanded to the rest of Europe, really changed how people lived and how they viewed themselves and their role in their culture and their society. For in some ways, very positively in terms of being able to make many things much more quickly and consistently that people could then use, but also for a lot of people maybe having some results that weren't so great in that they were working in conditions that were more like an assembly line, doing the same thing over and over potentially. And we talked about how there was this big move to cities at this time, um, and a need for more and more materials, things like cotton to turn into cloth and wood to turn into to furniture, etc., into things, and minerals to turn into metals to make stuff. And some of the pros and cons about that. Maybe you guys can remember our exercise where we were cutting a lot of snowflakes in a nice line and trying to see who did the best job. I'm trying to remember who is the standout uh, uh, assembly line leader for that day. I remember Esmeralda didn't do a tip-top job. She might have gotten fired, but maybe I'm wrong on that. It's all a little vague. But at any rate, hopefully that's enough to joggle your memories a little bit about last quarter. And so given that very quick review about some of the things we covered last year, what is it going to mean for us going into the next unit and for Europe, basically? Well, as you could imagine, after Napoleon came and kind of created this idea of France and an empire and pushed through Europe and threatened England and Germany and Russia, among others. Um, a lot of European nations started thinking, you know what, we need to create states, potentially empires that can stand up against any future Napoleons. And we, because we're industrializing, need more materials to help us expand, to help us make more things like cotton from Africa and lumber from the colonies in America and cotton from North America as well. We need more stuff so we can make more things and keep growing and getting stronger. And so what that push led to was a move towards imperialism, the growth of different nations into empires, and a bit of a race to establish dominance over other parts of the world to get the things they wanted to continue growing. So that's the unit we're going to get into next week. And I'm hoping that this little review will help joggle your memory after our extended spring break and our exciting stays at home so that we can talk more about this going forward. So lastly, and I promise to keep this short, um, so I'm going to try and stick to it. The next assignment that I want you to do is I want you to just write at least one paragraph on the following question. What did you find most interesting from last quarter and why? So what did we learn about in class that piqued your interest? And why? What was it? Was it the ideas about science, industrialization, some of those Enlightenment thinkers about who is good and bad and why? Take a little time to think about that. Maybe do a little research, maybe go back to some of your notes if you have them around, or go online and Google some of the names I mentioned. And try to put together, your thoughts in a nice, cohesive way that kind of shows me what you learned. And remember what I'm always looking for, always looking for that nice topic sentence, something to tell me what you're going to talk about, and then accurate key details, accurate supporting details from history that show me, that illustrate your main point and what you're trying to prove. Um, so go ahead and knock that one out. Like I told you on our other meetings, we're keeping this week pretty easy peasy so we can all get used to our new tools. Um, and so you can send this to me via email and or via text. And then going into next week, we'll, level it up a little bit and start doing a few more challenging things. But at any rate, I really appreciate your time watching this quick video. I really miss working with you guys in class. Doing this from home ain't the same. Getting getting into the classroom and trying to convince you to think about these things, that it's worth your time, is actually way more fun. Plus, I get to inflict some Japanese and practice my Spanish and German and whatnot on you, which is fun for me as well. So at any rate, can't wait till we get back together in class, hopefully sooner rather than later. Um, you know how to email and text me if you got any questions. Otherwise, I hope you have a really great evening. Take care. Talk to you soon.